Well, good morning, everyone. We do live in interesting times, don't we? After our service, it just so happens that Christy will be conducting the once-a-month healing prayer circle, and it might be a particularly good day to attend that. And we've resurrected the healing and harmony prayer, as we will do here in a few minutes as part of our contribution. I think it was George Santana who famously said, "Those who don't know history are condemned to repeat it." And I happen to be a bit of an amateur historian, although that's probably putting it far too greatly. But, the seeking of empire has been with us a very long time. And many of you here today have read this landmark book by some of our members, inspired by Sri Yukteswar's analysis of human history, and the book being called The Yugas. But archaeologists tell us that there was a time in the descending BCE era, sometime before, roughly, crudely, 2000 BCE, where the earliest cities that were formed by humans were not destroyed, were not burned to the ground. That the practice of seeking empire and destroying one another came as the era descended into increasing ignorance, as Sri Yukteswar described the cycles of history for us. In fact, there was a time that historians called the collapse of the Bronze Age, in which this otherwise secure empires of Egypt and in India and China all faced a sudden and mysterious collapse, burned to the ground the great cities of the times. And when you look carefully at a map of Asia and Europe, you will see that owing, I suppose, Rick would tell me, to glacial activity, the continents are basically flat from Holland all the way to the Urals, which separate Asia from Europe, through Berlin and all the way past Moscow, all the way through the Black Sea, Caspian, Tashkent, all the way to the borderlands of Tibet. It is flat. The movement of peoples and armies down through thousands of years, right through the Ukraine, has basically never stopped. Swami Kriyananda warned us specifically some years ago at the so-called collapse of the Soviet Empire. He said, "You don't change do bears have stripes?" They probably don't. But anyway, you don't change the spots on a leopard that easily. And the aggression represented by that culture and thousands of years of empire built. Genghis Khan founded the world's largest land empire. It stretched from Vietnam to Poland. And he established, or his successors established, the world's first international postal system, including religious tolerance and the banning of the kidnap and sale of women. And so this concept of empires, and which are their own justification. The sun never set, and it definitely sat afterwards, on the British Empire. Yogananda said the British are finished after World War II. World Wars I and II were fought for the collapse in consciousness of the very concept of empire. But it's far from expunged from consciousness. And now we have new weapons, don't we? The nuclear era. Swami Kriyananda said that, based on Yogananda's predictions, added to his own, that perhaps millions would die in the decades and time to come. Who will resist pressing the magic red button? Because land warfare is crude and slow and very expensive. And so we live on the brink of a great challenge to humanity. It's not that we didn't a week ago. From the time the first nuclear bomb was dropped, we have lived in an age of great insecurity. I remember hiding under my desk, the bomb shelters of the 50s and the 60s. Nothing has changed. Not really. It's, in fact, the potential has, well, to use the term they use, proliferated. And so what we have are millions of people like you and I. We are invisible, pretty much, although I think we ought to try to be more visible for the sake of the world and one another and so forth. But in any case, things are changing. Swami Kriyananda would frequently say, or at least from time to time say, that the movement of communities, including not just, I don't mean to limit it to residential communities, but nowadays we have the concept of virtual communities. The concept of people of like mind, not banding together because there's a factory or there's a river or for physical protection behind walls, but people banding together on levels of consciousness. I like to joke that great minds think alike, but then I almost always add, so do the others, because they do. And we can see that in the polarized politics of this country and so many other nations, can't we? And so it is that if you want to call it a solution, I mean, I call it a solution, but it's not like it's going to happen tomorrow, is for people of like mind to find one another, to stand up and to be counted. It's interesting to me that today's reading, it would appear to put down the philosopher. It would appear to debunk thinking. In fact, you know, there's a wonderful series, a movie series called The Samadhi Movie by a fellow Daniel Schmidt or something out of Canada. Beautifully done. Parts 1, 2, and 3. Talks about and calls on the, you know, the Adam and Eve story and the tree of knowledge being the recognition of the you know, the intellectual recognition of our separateness, and Horus in Egypt, and goes through all the great civilizations, showing how the fall of humanity had to do with the recognition of separateness, which in the teaching of Sri Yukteswar and of all the great civilization, that once upon a time on this planet was a golden age of consciousness. What was that golden age? It was the disappearance of separateness. And what we are pleased to call history is nothing but the devolution of consciousness into warfare and separation. And into, in this age, our particular age and civilization, into an overemphasis on the intellect. But it's the same true of emotions, right? I mean, why throw brickbats at the intellect? It's simply because that happens to be our mode of being in civilization, but it's just as bad with emotions. Once they're all stirred up, you don't know your left from your right. And what about restlessness? I mean, that's a epidemic in our culture today, the restlessness of our what's it called, screen time, and just all the silly things that people do, the fads and so forth. So it's not really about the intellect, because the solution is what appeared in the Whispers reading Padma did. It appeared in the affirmation about omniscience. You know, Yogananda called it superconsciousness. You know, and I don't know, I don't want to try to analyze an avatar here exactly, but certainly in the earlier part of the 20th century, when things like Freud and, you know, all that kind of stuff was popular, I don't know that he coined the term superconsciousness. For some reason, some fellow in France might have, but it doesn't matter. He was trying to point out that there was something other than our subconscious, and certainly something more valuable. You know, our conscious mind it's like the foam on the top of a ocean or a bathtub or something. It's just this thin.
Or a latte.
A latte, that's it. Our conscious mind is like a latte, the foam on the top of a latte. It doesn't last, right? You stick a spoon in it, gone. Because we're more influenced. The things we think, how we react to one another, what we see is far more governed by our subconscious mind. And then for the heck of it, we go to sleep for 6 to 8 hours. I mean, we're mostly subconscious, let's face it. Okay, the conscious mind counts for very little. The reasoning faculty, which is power, you know, I have spent most of my adult life trying to meditate and go beyond thoughts, and I'm really good at thoughts. Probably not the rest of you, but I happen to like thinking. And you know something? It's pretty much impossible. Oh, not that I don't enter into a state beyond thoughts. I'm proud to say that. No. And it's that even to approach meditation, you have to have a thought. Why the heck are you meditating? Why are you taking Sita's Learn to Meditate class? You cannot escape thought, and there's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing wrong. You cannot escape feeling. There's nothing wrong with it. You cannot escape action. There's not only nothing wrong with it, that if you don't do anything, you'll starve to death. Even Krishna said as much in the Bhagavad Gita. And so it's where it's coming from. We sing the song in the Festival of Light every Sunday. Out of the silence came the song of creation. Even science is telling us that. I love the joke, you know, they've come up with dark matter and all this stuff, and now somebody came up with doesn't matter. It's all a sham. Nothing our reason tells us, nothing our senses tell us, are only but, like the conscious latte foam, superficially true. Einstein said it's all energy. You see, until we can learn to see the truth, that shall make us free. And the truth goes beyond all seeming, all the differences that separate us. And in effect, then, people like you and I, and really millions of people around the world, we are the hope for a better world. Because this consciousness of separation, of which we see far too much of in a country like ours, which is supposed to represent freedom, freedom from the caste consciousness, freedom on all levels, legal, social, racial, religious, etc. We're not doing a very good job of it, but we're supposed to. We're supposed to be the best thing happening. Well, I don't know what I want to say about that, but let's try to live up to our destiny that way. And so this is really the important thing that's happening in our world. Superconsciousness is that realm out of which we have come and to which we go. You know, even in sleep, in the dreamless state of sleep, we just a little bit touch on that transcendent realm, which is the real reason we need sleep, without which we would go mad. And so this is the solution to our issues. Our prayers for peace, you know, the karma of nations goes on, and I was saying the other day that for me, my prayers for peace are more for the people. You know, including the soldiers, they're the cannon fodder, whatever side you fight on, right? But the people. Because, you know, the karma of nations is there. We don't know quite where it's all going to go. I could come up with reasons why it won't go too far, but it's not about reason, is it? What's happening? It's about a lot of emotions, history, things like that, things that let loose the dogs of war, as they say. So you don't know what's going to happen. We can't say exactly for sure. After all, war is the stupidest thing we ever invented, isn't it? Makes no sense. But there it is. We've always had it, and we'll continue to have it for a great many centuries to come. during this age. So Yukteswar said it's an age of great instability. No place on earth will be safe. Yogananda, in the latter part of his years as the World War II was coming to an end, and there was a movement to establish what we now call the United Nations. He said we need an international police force because the time will come when international criminals, which nowadays we call terrorists, will need to be, checkmated, need to be brought under control. Unfortunately, history hasn't shown that the United Nations is all that useful, but I don't want to go off in that direction particularly, because my emphasis is that the only way out is in, like Sita likes to say. That what we represent is really the most important thing happening on this planet. And while our prayers are useful and valuable, and we should send the vibration of peace out into the world, it's really how you and I live. Because the peace we have with people that we don't like, or the people who don't like us, and let's face it, that can't be helped either. It's how our consciousness, that's the greatest contribution we can make. And so this reading today, it points to us to essentially the inadequacy of what we consider ourselves to be, the limitations of what we consider ourselves to be. And although this path is very life-affirming and soul-affirming, unless we contact that soul, we can't really change. I have this image in my mind that we're like crystals. You can put a green light through it, or, but if you put white light through it, it refracts into a beautiful rainbow. And what I've seen of human nature is we can be devils or angels. We can be anything. Human behavior is not reliable, Yogananda said, until we achieve samadhi. Nirvikalpa samadhi, no less. And what I find useful in that, because what do I know about Nirvikalpa samadhi anyway, but what I find useful in that is to realize that you and me, each one of us, are capable of anything. From murder and mayhem, all the way to samadhi, of course. But partly I say that because it's a gift. It's a gift to recognize that each one of us can be a devil or an angel. Therefore, that we don't bookmark, we don't stereotype. Isn't that the big issue nowadays? Isn't it? Not to put people in boxes. The more traditional issues are racial and cultural and religious and all that, I grant you, but to the yogi, to the one whose consciousness is becoming increasingly perceptive and subtle, we also put one another in the boxes of age and health and skills or incompetence, all of those things. But the truth is, we could be any of these things. We just need to turn the radio dial to the channel we want to be or to express. And when we realize how, I think, didn't you say to me, there but for the grace of God go I? I haven't said that to myself in many years, but I sort of grew up with that thought because it's a powerful thought. So before we criticize one another or put ourselves down, we should realize that we're nothing. We're a crystal. We are that which we attune ourselves to. Do you see? That's both the, forget what the other thing is, but that's our salvation. We just need to, because we are nothing. We are none of these things. But if we tune ourselves to God, Christ, and the Masters, that's what we become. And if we hang out with, have satsang with, have community with, And I do hope that as these masks come off and so forth, we're seeing it now, but I do hope that people will start to drift back in and be with one another together. I have a lot of, I'm very happy about the whole internet thing. We have people attending classes from all over the world now. It's wonderful to reach out, but in the end, it's really who you hang out with. You can't get away from the fact that we're in these bodies and magnetism is shared when we come together. And so I do hope, for the sake of others who would typically 2 years ago be here on a Sunday, I do hope people will get over what has become the habit and the ease with which you can turn the box on. My father used to call it the idiot box. Anybody have a father who called it the idiot box of TV? Yeah, yeah. That stupid idiot box, he'd say, as he walked over and turned it off when I was watching cartoons, right? So we just have our own version of that, don't we? And so being together and reflecting back to one another the ideals and the truth of who we truly are, from which we have come and to which we are born to go, that's the solution for our troubles. And Yogananda, he saw it all coming. He realized where the world. He made the statement in the autobiography that Jesus without a body and Babaji with a body are those who guide the prophets of the world and guide the spiritual evolution of the planet. We don't really realize, because they're not standing here in front of us particularly, but we don't realize how much influence God has in the world through those who are God realized, and how important that is. And so, even though we have reason to be concerned, we have reason, well, I suppose you could say we have reason to fear, but that's sort of a stupid way of putting it, isn't it? Though we have concerns, the real fortress in which we live protected is God's inner presence. And so let us do what we can through prayer, principally, given the circumstances, and secondly, through our association with one another, people of like mind, to be seen, to help one another. I've often said that, what if it was Sunday morning, and what if it was just Lajana here with Padma and I? Oh, we'd have a jolly good time, I'm sure, but it isn't the same. Do you see what I mean? It's just, the magnetism isn't the same. One law that we haven't really discovered in our culture, but what the masters hold out for us, particularly Yogananda did, magnetism, it can resonate with us because we know the magnetism of electricity when we use it all the time. But magnetism is the law. The magnetism of people is what governs the fate of history and our own fate. And so this is an important time to understand the power of magnetism, which is greater, the sum is greater than the individual parts by the fact of our coming together. So let's make that our affirmation, our solution, our contribution.